Welcome to the Leadership Transition course as we continue on this module that looks again more to the topic self-personality check. And in this particular topic, we will look to the 16 personalities. The 16 personalities is designed for personal traits check in general, which means unlike Facet 5, which is more for designed for workplace, 16 personality is more generic. And actually, it's also free to go online and take the test on the 16personality.com site. So when you do that, you make an account and you can then do the test. That gives you a feedback in your account what type of personality you are. But what is actually 16 personality test? So 16 personality is simply just a personality test that tells you, where your personality falls within 16 different types of personality, which has been defined based on 5 different traits. So actually, mainly based on 4 traits with an additional 5th trait that kind of classify your personality on 2 levels. So the first 4 traits are mine, which looks at introverted or extroverted, and are represented with the letter I and E. The second trait is energy, which is looking at something like sensing or being observant, and intuitiveness, which is represented by N. Of course, sensing or observant is represented by S. The third trait deals with nature, which has to do with how you think and how you feel. Thinking represented by T and feeling represented by F. And the fourth one is tactics, which looks at how things like judging or prospecting mainly deal with strategy in terms of planning. So judging with J and prospecting with P. And finally, the fifth one, which is the last category or trait that classifies you also as either assertive, that's an A, or turbulent. So basically, when you look at, for example, these traits, so basically if you look at the first 4 going from mind, energy, nature, and tactics, which each one of them are divided into 2. So for example, mind talks about extroverts and introverts. Extroverts are energized people. They enjoy a variety of tasks and they are quick-paced, good at multitasking. Introverts, of course, like working alone and in small groups, prefer a more deliberate pace for themselves and like to focus one task at a time. Those who are sensors or observant, are more realistic people who like to focus on the fact and details. They just apply common sense and to find practical solutions. Those who are intuitive prefer to, focus on possibilities and big picture and see patterns. So they can deviate from the facts just to, try to think a little bit outside the fact to see whether something holds. And both sensors and intuitive people talks more about the kind of energy you put in. And of course, thinkers and feelers more has to do with your nature. If you're a thinker, then you tend to make decisions using logic, analysis, objectivity, pros and cons, honesty, consistency, and fairness. And if you're a feeler, you tend to be sensitive, and cooperative and decide based on, your own personal values and how others will be affected. So you kind of maybe care a little bit more, but can be over caring as feelers than as thinkers in your nature. And when you talk about tactics or strategy in what you do, then you're looking at either being a judger or a perceiver. A judger of someone who likes to be organized, structured, likes to make plan. Let's stick to the plan and follow it that way. and perceiver just keeps a lot of things open. Well, we can plan, but I like to leave it. Let's see what happens. And something that comes spontaneously, perceivers can easily react to that compared to judges who may not have a plan immediately. And all this, when you take that into account, depending on which combination you make, whether you are extrovert, sensing, thinking, and judging, or extrovert, intuitive, thinking, and judging, or introvert, sensing, feeling, and perceiving, combining these then forms the 16 personality. And at the end, there's always the identity attached to each, which can either make you assertive or turbulent. And of course, assertive means you know exactly what you want, you're calm, you know where things might go to, and you are a bit more patient with things. Turbulence can also then be that you react too quickly to things and you don't really think it through. So you don't really think it through, and you can react easily or give feedback easily or quickly without waiting. I mean, in general, there is no good and bad in all this. But what system personality does is show you different bits of combination. And based on that, you can have personalities like an architect, which is, if you use the letters we talked about for each of those traits, then you can be an INTJ, which is introvert, intuitive, thinking, and judging. That's for an architect. And you can either be an assertive architect or a turbulent one. But basically, you can look up 16 personalities. You can look at the different types of personalities, and they splitted the 16 personalities into 4 groups or categories. There are people who are like analysts, and I think the major future here for them is that they are mostly thinkers. One thing that is common among analysts are they are thinkers. So when it comes to the tactics, they are more thinkers than feelers. And diplomats, which is the other category, are more of feelers. And in their tactics, they feel more than think, and the rest can be different for them. And also, and I think one thing common also for diplomats that you can also observe when you look at those 16 personalities is they are also intuitive to some extent. And in that way, it's also applicable for analysts. So for analysts and diplomats, they are both intuitive, but the difference is that analysts tend to think more in their tactics and diplomats tend to feel. And the other category is sentinels, who tend to be, more on the, you could say, sensing part. That is when you talk about how they do things, and then explorers are those who also tend to be more perceiving. They are more, they are people who perceive than judge. So they tend to not plan, but tend to just go into spontaneous. They're more risk takers, if you would like it, and that's why they're called explorers. So when you look at each one of these and you look at their characteristics, some of them goes from being serious, practical, to being generous or cooperative. And depending on where you fall, when you have this test, it tells you a lot, and it relates that to how you behave in your relationship, in a family, towards friends, what kind of friends you keep. And it also tells you something about your career. And based on this, you can assess yourself and look at your life in practical and ask yourself, does this fit? But most importantly, it creates awareness for you. And it creates awareness of your possible downside or low lights, where you can also then take care of by looking at your big side or your advantages or the things that you do best. And that's the whole idea of understanding your personality. So as a leader, so both for Sarah, for John, for James, they need to take this into account depending on where they fall into, and be able to understand themselves and look at how best to make the balance in order to be able to become good leaders or managers for their careers or their future intentions. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.